The main problem seemed to be the weight of snow crushing trees. My friend Ken is just looking at the map in the book. It looks as if he's doing a biblical reading here. At the end of the garden, at the top, you reach a little plateau with this really wonderful plantation of birches. Just one of the most moving, cultivated versions of nature that I've ever seen. So carefully done to be natural and yet made, just on that balance. And I made this little kind of emblem of what this place came to mean to me. Frame Wilderness, Drumderry, Teutonia. And one of the nice things he did, apart from snow, his main problem was rabbits and deer. And one of the things he did as a technologist was this, with cans, and they're still there. And it's just so touching to see these cans that have been left. And imagine all the trips to Safeway or the Co-op. And the way the tree is burst open, the can. And again, it's this archaeology, just like with the concrete bays across the head, incredibly touching when things do take on that. Is it nature? Is it culture? Is it ruin? Where are we here? And when I was in those birches, I realized that that was the site that was the perfect analogy. The birches gave you a way of reading the wind towers. They gave you actually a way of installing the wind towers if we chose to bring those branches of knowledge together. If that makes sense. So I did feel, after having done the research project here and started off with this wind flower idea, that yes, there was a purchase there. There was a genuine way in which we can read between these different specialisms. Although sometimes it takes a poet or an artist to do it. Again, these eras of technology. The TV mast, I don't know, 60s, 50s, probably 60s, would have been there, and then these arrive, and then these will go, and generational change. I always love these little boxes that they have by the turbines, and keep their slippers in them. And I'm going to finish, because I am going to finish, by going back to a site I referred to. Does anyone want to talk about Teutonia, or the garden, or gardening? I talked about this site before, which I haven't researched, and I must, because I think it's a fascinating confirmation of everything I've said. This is a made water garden. It doesn't advertise itself as such, but you can't look at that and not feel that one's arrived at a place where a beautiful architecture, a stunning architecture, meets a beautiful reflective composition, a landscape garden, a water garden. This is Dalhousie, which is near Comrie, and also lower down in Perthshire. And you will meet people walking their dog here. It's interesting about these hydro stations that you can just walk in, you can walk round and then walk over the bridge here and peer into the workings and feel that access. There's a tunnel here, and you can see the water coming out from under the mountain. And you're aware that the workings are hidden in the hill. And it just makes me think of Monet. And it makes me think of an era when the hydro board, which was nationalised, thought of itself in such a way as it made a garden, which is not what we have now with energy. And it demonstrates a kind of ideal possibility that energy could be associated with leisure, with the reflective, with a sense of our all owning that beauty, with a sense of the spiritual, and even, maybe, even of the sacred. In past times, that technology would have been seen in that way. And I'm going to read the little poem that I wrote about Dalhousie. The water mirror has the spruce-clad slant of Bjorn Dalhousie. It's the hill. Under a rest in the day's best pool of cloud, a slant in glass, windows that crown what's mere reflection. Below sky, disturbed by the churn that propels beneath the station bridge. Sucked twigs, a lucozade and dead frog, released into the managed current that glides the long tail race between banks hemmed with birch, to the sluice that rips the narrow cut of the concrete chute, meeting a natural end, mingling with the drifted river Erne. The empty hub is silent. Whatever electricity there is generates deep in the hill's core, where the waters force through the threaded blades of dented turbines, screened from view by this idyllic water garden, a Giverny in reflection. This is the power of the mirror, to know nothing of labour. This is the power of water, to have no interest whether particles rest in static pools or are compelled through hewn rock, penstock and pipe, for water and mirror are given over to reflection. But they will never make production any of their concern, remaining amiably careless of their many effects, whether reflecting a falling leaf, flooding a glen, or stringing a line of lights through the quiet streets of a small Perthshire town. I allowed the idyll there just to veer into that moment where we decide we might like to forget about the energy product. But what I like about this place is that it's both there and not there. What I mean is that you can go and relax and enjoy it, and then you can look at it and think about and be thankful for the electricity, that it allows both. None of our other energy forms at this time seem to be inviting that kind of multi-purpose consciousness. There's no reason, I mean, Scotland, which is so proud of proclaiming its wind farms, shouldn't be using them to nationalise land. Why shouldn't a landowner who owns a huge swathe of the Highlands, if he wants to exploit that landscape, he doesn't own the wind, he wants to exploit that wind, why shouldn't he be obliged that after the wind towers are gone away, that land should become a park, a national park? None of our economic agency for these sites involves any sense of a future which has a communal aspect, an aspect of leisure, a utopian aspect, or a shift in ownership. And again, that comes back to the coalfields as well. Windcrafting and such concepts are simply a name for what used to be a reality when the Hydro Board was a national agency it was also part of ordinary people being able to access the landscape that had been shut off from them. They were mandated to take over these landscapes from the landowners if they wished it, if they were needed for economic productivity. And not only did this power bring electricity to thousands of homes in the Highlands which had no access to the grid, but they also allowed walkers to begin to increase their access into these landscapes. And I think that's a model that we shouldn't let go of. It's not just about remembering technology, it's about putting technology and nature back into an equilibrium and a progressive advance, which is also a way of saying that yes, it might be our generation's responsibility to put up some wind turbines on a particular moor, and yes, that might involve losing or harming the peat or the species. But we know from the slag heaps at Niddrie that nature heals those things in a short time. In Niddrie they now preserve the slag heaps because there are rare alpines growing on them. 20 years ago I used to watch the news with people demanding that they be removed, and now they're actually becoming ecological sites. In just the same way, if we do put wind towers up on a peat moor, when we take them away, that can become a site of an enhanced ecology. And that's enough preaching. So, if anyone would like to add, debate, discuss, correct, improve, advance, enlarge, energize and extend.
Great, many thanks. Good. I can't help thinking about artificially made banks with trees on that you see everywhere, which perhaps on the side of the motorway, once they get to a certain age, they do look really beautiful. There's a difference between where they're set in really an extraordinary landscape already and where they're on the side of the M1. I mean, even as you go older part, right at the bottom of the M1, where those concrete bridges and things are sort of gruesome, but at the same time they've become sort of attractive as they've got older.
Time.
Weird, isn't it?
Does it?
I think the thing I was thinking about was just my aesthetic response to there and to some of those banks with trees on that I can remember, when I was younger, sort of walking past in sort of suburban environments, where I found it quite difficult. I felt the aesthetics, but I couldn't take them any further simply because of the place they were in.
Yeah, I think the architecture is so wonderful there.
Yeah. Well, it was partly the architecture that because I remember there used to be a 30s water pumping building that I used to walk past, and I always thought it was really beautiful, but found it very difficult to accept its beauty because of where it was.
Yeah.
In the midst of sort of suburban sprawl.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting the degree to which you can't, there's a beauty there, but you can't kind of accept it somehow.
Yeah. Presumably the trees were also put there to make the banks firmer.
Yeah.
So it may have been an entirely practical reason.
But that's what interests me about the Latham idea. Because rather like
seeing beyond the ugliness.
Yeah, rather like it's intervening in that process, like I was saying about those French villagers who couldn't accept a recent war but could accept a medieval war. Yeah. And it's as though he's sort of, because the thing I remember about the Latham project, I remember hearing about it and reading about it and thinking what was one of the things that was really wonderful about it was just sheer ambition of it in cultural terms, to turn round perception in that kind of a way. or to just try it. It didn't really matter if it happened or not. It just,
I don't know,
the fact of trying it
some
seemed
of
very
you may
important.
not know the project, but I think he did have a proposal to make a large book-based sculpture on it. Thank God he didn't.
Yes,
You know, and that's the interesting thing about the flaw in any one of us as authors, that he did this miraculous thing by doing nothing, in effect. It's really an act of naming. It's a very primitive, almost Neolithic act. And that he couldn't have done it without the aerial photos. I used to think he flew, but he didn't. He just had access to these aerial surveys, which I think were maybe military.
Yeah.
And that was the shift of perception. Whether he could have seen the ugly slab heap as a goddess from ground level, and that's the interesting thing about shifting your perception, your point of view.
But it's true, isn't it? The names are now used, aren't they?
They are new. Well, they had names already, and I don't know actually. I don't know now, but what I find lovely is his ashes are scattered on the bench. That's absolutely moving. So he's become part of his own history. And who would have thought that an industrial slag heap would become a spiritual site of memory? I think that's quite... Yeah, it's one of the most important post-war projects. But if he'd made his own sculpture, it would have ruined it for me.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's not always just about even when the artist becomes the expert, it's not just about what they do. It's a moment where their knowledge becomes held in common, I would say. No one else.
How to intervene, isn't it?
Good night.
So it's about how you intervene with a landscape with sensitivity, and how the discourse continues after your intervention has rotted away. And
I think that you have to remember. One of the things I think is it's about age, that as we grow older, we become aware of this strange effect of time. I don't think it happened to me till I was 40, where suddenly you look at something from your past and you realise it's history and it sinks. But you can't assume how that will work in the future. So it's a kind of clumsy, what Latham was working with was ugly, and he looked very eccentric. I'm going to stand up for that I wouldn't have found that work easy at that time. So it's not just so easy as using words like that we all like using, like sensitive. Sometimes it's about being able to cope with ugliness, I think, or see through it or beyond it, which is kind of just a trick of one's own perception. Again, doesn't something come in here about being an expert in not being an expert? I think. Lucy, go on, say something.
Well, I was thinking back to what you were saying about the economic sort of value that's placed on landscapes and what happens when landscapes become deindustrialised, and there's a kind of very uneasy cultural relationship with the aesthetic of that place, and as artists perhaps we can have a different relationship with it and make lateral connections, fictitious connections, jumps, leaps, jokes.
That's the self-elected memorialists, in a way.
Yeah.
I think with Costa Head, what I loved was a Latham-like awareness that this was a work. The site, all I needed to do was learn from him and go, this is archaeology. I didn't need to put a sculpture there, and if anyone does, I'll blow it up. All you need to know sometimes is what you're looking at. And that's the oddness of being an artist, that I hope we're trying to get beyond an era where you have to put a sculpture up to say what the meaning is. And that was the flow in that moment with Latham, that maybe he was needing to say, I have told you all this is art, but actually he'd already made the work when he collaged the 5 photos together and named it.
And repositioning.
Yeah, 5 minutes work.
But it's interesting that he was always very committed to the idea of a book, and a lot of it's to do with writing and publishing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he didn't just sort of design large pieces. In fact, he didn't do a lot of that at all, really. He made artworks of books and about books and
They're
through
gallery
books.
works, Chris. I mean, they belong there.
Yeah.
They were good for galleries, good for...
But the first time I knew about that project was in a book, an arts council,
Yeah.
small arts
76.
council little thing. Yeah,
Beautiful.
it is.
No, I agree, but you don't then want to put the
No.
80-metre high...
No, I agree with you entirely about that, but I just think it's interesting that maybe it's got a lot to do with the types of practices we're talking about and the degree to which conceptualism and things like that have allowed the